I stood at the altar in my custom Vera Wang gown, watching my mother's face drain of color as Marcus Chen, the tech billionaire she'd obsessed over for years, slipped the 20-carat diamond ring onto my finger. The same Marcus Chen whose magazine covers she collected, whose interviews she quoted at dinner parties, whose success she'd thrown in my face 1,000 times while calling me worthless. The irony was delicious. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant announced, and as Marcus's lips met mine, I caught sight of my mother gripping her champagne flute so tightly, I thought it might shatter. Just like her dreams of ever being associated with the kind of success she'd worshipped from afar but never achieved herself. Behind her, my father sat rigid in his morning coat, his face a mask of barely controlled shock. My sister Sophia, the golden child who could do no wrong, looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. The rest of the wedding guests, tech moguls, venture capitalists, celebrities, and genuine old money aristocrats, applauded enthusiastically, completely unaware that they were witnessing the culmination of the most satisfying revenge plot in history. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all began. 5 years ago, in that suffocating Georgian mansion in Greenwich, where I was nothing more than the family disappointment. The daughter who existed solely to make everyone else feel better about themselves. Growing up as Elena Victoria Morrison was like living in a house of mirrors designed to reflect everyone's beauty but yours. Every surface in our home seemed to showcase my inadequacies while highlighting everyone else's perfection. My mother, Victoria Ashworth Morrison, was a former Miss Connecticut who'd married my father for his old money lineage and spent her days maintaining the illusion of effortless superiority that came with being a Morrison wife. She was the type of woman who looked flawless at 7 in the morning, who never had a hair out of place, who could make other women feel frumpy just by existing in the same room. My younger sister Sophia was her masterpiece, a perfect blonde-haired, blue-eyed replica who'd inherited all of Mother's pageant-worthy features and none of my unfortunate tendency toward what they called intellectual intensity. While Sophia got private ballet lessons with former Bolshoi dancers, equestrian training at the most exclusive stables in Connecticut, and shopping trips to Madison Avenue where she'd model outfit after outfit for Mother's approval, I got lectures about my unfortunate features, my off-putting intensity, and my complete inability to make myself appealing to others. "Elena, darling, you simply must do something about that serious expression," my mother would say, studying my reflection in the hallway mirror with the same distaste she reserved for discussing the help's personal lives. "Men don't want to marry women who look like they're solving mathematical equations at dinner parties. Look at your sister. See how her face lights up when she smiles? That's what men want. Joy, lightness, the feeling that you'll make their lives easier, not more complicated." The worst part wasn't even the direct criticism. It was how she'd use other people's success as ammunition against me. She was particularly obsessed with Marcus Chen, the self-made tech billionaire who'd built an empire from nothing and had become something of a media darling. His face graced our coffee table magazines. Fortune, Forbes, Vanity Fair. His quotes were screenshot on her phone and shared at dinner parties. She attended every charity gala in Manhattan hoping to catch a glimpse of him, returning home with detailed reports of his presence that she'd share over breakfast the next morning. "Now that's what I call a real man," she'd sigh, scrolling through the latest article about his acquisition of some promising startup. "Self-made, brilliant, devastatingly handsome, and completely self-possessed. He knows exactly what he wants and how to get it. Of course, he'd never look twice at someone like you, Elena. Men like Marcus Chen want wives who enhance their image, who make them look good at important events. They want women who understand how to be an asset, not a liability." She'd pause here, letting her eyes drift meaningfully over my appearance. Usually my weekend uniform of jeans, oversized sweaters, and the reading glasses I needed for close work. Men like that want wives who make them feel powerful and successful, not wives who challenge them or make them work harder just to have a pleasant conversation. They want someone who makes their life feel like a celebration, not a graduate seminar. When I graduated summa cum laude from MIT with dual degrees in computer science and applied mathematics, my achievement was dismissed with a wave of her manicured hand. "It's not very feminine, dear, all those numbers and computers. It's so impersonal. You should have studied something more suitable for a woman of your background. Art history, like Sophia, or perhaps literature. Something that would give you interesting things to discuss at dinner parties without making men feel like you're showing off. When I landed a coveted position at Goldman Sachs working in their emerging technology investment division, it was met with, well, we all know they have diversity quotas to fill these days. I'm sure they needed someone with your technical background. Though I do hope you'll try to soften your image there. Perhaps some new clothes? A different hairstyle? You want to fit in with the other women, not stand out for the wrong reasons. When I tried to show them the artificial intelligence application I'd been developing in my spare time, a revolutionary machine learning tool that could predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy, my father barely looked up from his Wall Street Journal. That's nice, Elena. Very technical. Though I'm not sure I understand why you're spending so much time on hobbies when you should be focusing on making yourself more marriageable. You're 24 now. Most girls from our circle are engaged by your age. My mother nodded in agreement. Your father's right, darling. All this computer work is fine as a career, I suppose, but you need to think about your future, real future. Marriage, children, a proper social position. Men don't want to marry women who are more interested in machines than in making a home. Look at Sophia. She understands how to balance ambition with femininity. She's cultivating the kinds of interests that make her interesting to the right sort of man. Sophia, who was 22 and whose greatest intellectual achievement was completing a bachelor's degree in art history from Vassar, which she'd barely managed despite having tutors for every challenging course, would smile sweetly during these conversations. She understood her role perfectly. Be beautiful, be charming, be agreeable, and let everyone else handle the complicated thinking. But what none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that I had lived this life before. Not literally, of course, but the Elena who had originally inhabited this existence had died at 28, alone and broken, from a stress-induced heart attack brought on by years of emotional abuse and the crushing weight of never being enough for the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. I remembered everything from that first life. Every cutting comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment when I'd tried desperately to win their approval, only to be told I was trying too hard or not hard enough, or simply trying in the wrong way entirely. I remembered the years I'd spent believing their version of who I was, the way I'd internalized their criticisms until I could barely look in a mirror without hearing my mother's voice pointing out my flaws. The relationships I'd sabotaged because I was so convinced I was unlovable that I'd push away anyone who showed genuine interest. The career opportunities I'd declined because I'd been taught to believe I wasn't smart enough, wasn't polished enough, wasn't enough, period. I remembered the original Elena's final years, working herself to death trying to prove her worth to family members who had already decided she had none, accepting their crumbs of conditional affection like they were precious gifts, and ultimately dying alone in her studio apartment with no one to mourn her except the doorman who'd found her body 3 days later. But somehow, impossibly, I'd been given a second chance. I woke up on my 21st birthday, 3 years before the original timeline's ending, with all 31 years of memories intact and a burning clarity about exactly what my family was capable of and what I needed to do to rewrite my story completely. This time, I wasn't going to waste a single moment trying to earn love from people who were constitutionally incapable of giving it. This time, I was going to use everything I knew about them, about the future, about the opportunities that lay ahead, to build a life so extraordinary that their opinions would become irrelevant. The original Elena had spent years trying to prove herself worthy of their approval. This Elena was going to prove to the entire world that their judgment was worthless. That moment of absolute decision crystallized during Sophia's engagement party to her college boyfriend, Bradley Ashworth III, a trust fund baby whose family money came from his great-grandfather's steel fortune and whose greatest personal achievement was maintaining a single-digit golf handicap. The party was held at our family's country club with 200 guests celebrating what my mother kept calling the perfect match between two perfect young people. I watched my mother orchestrate the entire evening like she was directing a Broadway production, making sure photographers captured Sophia's radiant smile, her perfect posture, her effortless grace as she floated from group to group accepting congratulations. Bradley, handsome in the bland, inoffensive way that old money families preferred, stood beside her looking appropriately proud of his acquisition. "Isn't she magnificent?" my mother whispered to Mrs. Pemberton from the garden club, both of them watching Sophia pose for photos near the rose garden. "She has such natural elegance, such an instinct for making people feel comfortable. Bradley is absolutely smitten, and why wouldn't he be? She's exactly what every man wants in a wife." I stood in the corner near the bar, effectively invisible in my navy dress and low heels, watching this performance of perfect family happiness. Several family friends had asked politely about my job, my life in the city, my plans for the future, with the kind of forced interest people showed when they were trying to be polite, but clearly found the subject boring. "Elena works with computers," my mother would interject before I could provide any details. "Very technical, very demanding. We keep telling her she works too hard, but you know how some girls are. They get so focused on their careers, they forget about everything else that matters." The implication was always clear. I was the daughter who had prioritized the wrong things, who had missed the point of what women were supposed to want, who was so focused on professional achievement that I'd neglected the more important work of making myself into wife material. Around 10 o'clock, as the party was winding down and most of the guests had offered their final congratulations to the happy couple, I found myself standing on the club's terrace, looking out over the golf course. The Connecticut evening was perfect, warm but not humid, with just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes away, and I could hear the gentle murmur of conversation and laughter drifting from inside. "There you are, darling," my mother's voice came from behind me. "I was wondering where you disappeared to. You really should try to be more social at these events, Elena. People notice when you lurk in corners." I turned to face her, taking in her perfectly applied makeup, her tastefully expensive cocktail dress, her genuine satisfaction with how the evening had unfolded. "Sorry, Mother, I was just getting some air." "Well, come say goodbye to the Ashworths. They're lovely people, and Bradley's father was just telling me about some charity work they're involved with. The kind of thing that would be perfect for you. Volunteer work is so important for unmarried women. It shows you're not completely self-absorbed." Something about that phrase, unmarried women, delivered with just enough emphasis to make it clear that this was a character flaw rather than a life choice, crystallized everything I'd been feeling into perfect cold clarity. I was done. Done with their version of my story, done with accepting their judgment, done with pretending that their approval was something worth pursuing. I had 3 years of future knowledge, a brilliant mind they'd never bothered to appreciate, and access to opportunities they couldn't even imagine. It was time to show them exactly what they'd underestimated. "Actually, Mother, I don't think I'll be doing much volunteer work in the near future. I'm going to be rather busy building my own empire." She laughed, the tinkling sound she made when someone said something she found charmingly naive. "Your own empire, darling. That's wonderful that you're so ambitious. But you have to be realistic about these things. Women in our family support important causes and married important men. We don't build empires. That's not really us." "Maybe it's not you," I said, meeting her eyes directly, "but it's definitely me." The next morning, I submitted my resignation to Goldman Sachs, withdrew my entire savings account, and used the money to put a deposit on a small apartment in Palo Alto. I had work to do, and I needed to be where the future was being built. The AI application I'd been developing wasn't just good, it was revolutionary. Using my knowledge of market trends that wouldn't become obvious for another 2 years, I'd created something that could predict technology stock movements with almost supernatural accuracy. But the application itself was just the beginning. I knew exactly which technologies were about to explode, which startups were going to become unicorns, and which established companies were about to make catastrophic mistakes. More importantly, I knew Marcus Chen's schedule, his investment philosophy, his personal interests, and the exact combination of factors that would make him pay attention to an unknown entrepreneur with a crazy idea. In my original timeline, I'd followed his career obsessively from afar, the way my mother collected magazine articles about celebrities. I knew he'd be at the TechCrunch Disrupt conference in 3 weeks. I knew he always attended the opening day panels, but skipped the networking happy hours. I knew he took his coffee at exactly 3:15 every afternoon and preferred to drink it standing near whatever window offered the best natural light. I knew he was a sucker for brilliant women who could challenge his thinking, and I knew exactly which aspects of future technology would capture his imagination. I spent those 3 weeks preparing the most comprehensive business plan anyone had ever brought to a first meeting. I didn't just have projections for my AI application. I had detailed analyses of every major technology trend that would dominate the next 5 years, complete with timeline predictions and market impact assessments that wouldn't be proven accurate until long after I'd secured funding. The day of the conference, I positioned myself strategically in the main lobby of the Moscone Center, wearing my most professional suit and carrying a portfolio that contained enough revolutionary ideas to transform 3 different industries. When Marcus approached the coffee station where I knew he'd be taking his afternoon break, looking exactly like his magazine photos, but somehow more substantial and magnetic in person, I felt my heart rate spike with a combination of nerves and anticipation. "Excuse me, Mr. Chen," I said, stepping into his path with a confidence that was 90% performance and 10% genuine terror. "I know you probably hear this constantly, but I have something that's going to fundamentally change how humans interact with technology. And I think you're the only investor smart enough to understand what I'm really offering." He paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips, and I saw the exact moment he decided to humor me, instead of politely extracting himself from the conversation. His eyes, darker and more intelligent than any photograph had ever captured, focused on me with the kind of attention that made me understand why he was so successful at identifying winning investments. "You have 60 seconds," he said, and I could tell from his tone that he was genuinely curious rather than just being polite. I launched into my pitch with surgical precision, hitting every point I knew would resonate with his particular combination of technical expertise and business acumen. I didn't just describe my AI application, I explained how it represented the first practical implementation of predictive analytics that could scale across multiple industries. I outlined the market opportunity with the kind of detailed projections that demonstrated not just optimism, but genuine understanding of technology adoption cycles. I anticipated his obvious questions and addressed them before he could ask, showing him that I'd thought through every angle he might consider. As I spoke, I watched his expression evolve from polite interest to genuine curiosity to something that looked almost like excitement. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying me with the same intensity I'd seen him bring to his most important interviews. "Send me everything," he said finally, handing me his business card. "The complete business plan, technical specifications, market analysis, competitive landscape assessment, financial projections for the next 5 years, and your background. I want to see all of it, and I want to see it by tomorrow morning." "You'll have it by tonight," I promised and meant it. I spent the next 14 hours crafting the most comprehensive business proposal in venture capital history. I didn't just provide what he'd asked for. I included detailed white papers on 3 related technologies that wouldn't hit the market for another 18 months, complete market analyses that demonstrated understanding of consumer behavior patterns that hadn't yet been identified by major consulting firms, and financial projections that were conservative enough to be credible, but ambitious enough to be exciting. More importantly, I included a personal statement that positioned me not just as a smart technologist, but as someone who understood the bigger picture of how technology could transform human potential. I wrote about growing up in a family that valued appearance over substance, and how that experience had taught me to see past surface level presentations to identify real value. I described my vision for a future where artificial intelligence wouldn't replace human creativity, but would amplify it, allowing people to focus on the work that only humans could do while machines handled the predictable, repetitive tasks that consumed so much of everyone's time and energy. 3 days later, I was sitting in his pristine conference room on the 42nd floor of his San Francisco headquarters, looking out over the bay while he reviewed my projections with his senior partners. The office was exactly what I'd expected: minimalist, expensive, designed to convey both success and serious purpose. But Marcus himself was more compelling in person than I'd anticipated. He had a way of listening that made you feel like the most important person in the room. And when he asked questions, they weren't designed to catch you off guard, but to genuinely understand what you were thinking. "Elena," he said after his partners had finished their technical review, "this is extraordinary work. The AI application alone would be worth funding, but your market analysis suggests you understand trends that most people in this industry won't recognize for years. How did you develop this level of insight? Kaiso, I'd prepared for this question, knowing it was the one that could either establish my credibility or raise suspicions about how a 24-year-old from Connecticut had developed such sophisticated understanding of Silicon Valley dynamics. I've been studying technology adoption patterns since college, I said, which was technically true if you counted my previous lifetime of obsessive research. I realized early on that most people focus on the technology itself instead of understanding how human behavior determines which innovations actually succeed. I spent 2 years at Goldman Sachs analyzing investment patterns in emerging technologies, and I started to see predictable cycles in how markets respond to genuine innovation versus superficial improvements. And your family background? Asked Sandra Kim, his senior partner. Your bio mentions growing up in Connecticut. What made you decide to leave that world for Silicon Valley? This was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. My family never understood why I was interested in technology. They saw it as unfeminine, impractical, something I'd grow out of when I got serious about my future. I realized that if I wanted to build something meaningful, I needed to be around people who valued innovation over tradition. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What kind of future were they expecting you to pursue? Marriage to someone from our social circle, charitable work, supporting my husband's career rather than building my own. The traditional path for women from families like mine. I met his eyes directly. I decided I wanted to build something instead of just supporting someone else's ambitions. And what did they think of that decision? I smiled, feeling the first hint of the satisfaction that would eventually become my greatest revenge. They thought I was making a terrible mistake. My mother told me that men like you would never be interested in women like me, too serious, too ambitious, too focused on the wrong things. Men like me? He asked, and I caught the slight smile that suggested he found my mother's assumptions amusing. Successful men. Men who've built something important. According to my family, men like that want wives who enhance their image, not women who might overshadow them with their own achievements. The room was quiet for a moment, and I wondered if I'd overplayed my hand by making the conversation too personal. Then Marcus laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that transformed his entire face. Well, he said, I suppose we'll have to prove your family wrong about that, won't we? 2 weeks later, I walked out of that conference room with a signed term sheet for $40 million in Series A funding and a valuation that made me one of the youngest tech entrepreneurs to ever secure that level of investment for a first company. But somewhere between that initial meeting and the contract signing, something unexpected happened. Marcus wasn't just interested in my business. He was fascinated by me as a person. Our required business meetings stretched into long dinners where we discussed philosophy, future technology trends, and our completely different approaches to family relationships. Our email exchanges about user interface design evolved into late-night conversations about childhood experiences, personal ambitions, and the kind of future we each wanted to build. You're remarkable, he told me one evening as we watched the sunset from his penthouse balcony, 6 months after our first meeting. I've never met anyone who thinks about problems the way you do. Most entrepreneurs focus on the immediate market opportunity, but you see 3 steps ahead. You understand not just what people want now, but what they're going to need before they know they need it. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I asked, only half joking. My family always told me I was exhausting to be around because I overthink everything. His expression darkened slightly. Your family sounds like they didn't know what they had. They knew exactly what they had, I replied. They just didn't think it was worth very much. Then they were idiots, he said bluntly, and something about his immediate, unqualified dismissal of their judgment made my heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with business. 6 months after our first meeting, he asked me to dinner, not as business partners discussing quarterly projections, but as 2 people who discovered they enjoyed each other's company beyond any professional necessity. A year after that, he proposed on the same balcony where he'd first told me I was remarkable, with a ring that had cost more than my family's annual charitable donations, and a speech about how I'd changed not just his perspective on technology, but his understanding of what it meant to build a life with someone who challenged him to be better. The engagement announcement was my first real test of how my family would react to my transformation from disappointment daughter to tech industry darling. Marcus Chen? My mother's voice was barely above a whisper when I called to share the news. The Marcus Chen? Elena, that's impossible. How do you even know Marcus Chen? We've been business partners for 2 years, Mother. He funded my company, and now we're getting married next spring. The silence on the other end was so complete, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then my father's voice came on the line. Apparently, my mother had been too shocked to continue the conversation solo. Elena, this is your father. I think there might be some confusion here. Are you saying you're engaged to Marcus Chen, the billionaire? The one your mother is always reading about in those magazines? That's exactly what I'm saying, Daddy. Check tomorrow's Wall Street Journal if you don't believe me. We're announcing the engagement officially, along with news about my company's upcoming IPO. Your company's what now? Neuroflow Technologies. Maybe you've heard of it? We're revolutionizing workplace productivity through AI-powered predictive analytics. Marcus provided the initial funding, but after our Series B round last month, we're valued at $1.2 billion. The IPO should put us well over $2 billion by summer. More silence. Then, in a voice I'd never heard my father use before. Elena, are you telling me that you've built a billion-dollar company? I'm telling you, I've built a company that's going to change how every business in America operates within the next 5 years. The $1 billion is just how the market measures that impact. I don't understand. My mother's voice came back on the line, high and strained. When did this happen? How did this happen? The last time we spoke, you were working at that bank. I left Goldman Sachs 3 years ago to start my own company. I've been rather busy since then. But you never said anything. You never told us you were dating anyone, let alone someone like Marcus Chen. You never mentioned starting a company. We had no idea you were doing anything like this. You never asked, I said simply. Every time we spoke, you wanted to know when I was going to get serious about finding a husband and settling down. You never seemed interested in what I was actually doing with my life. That's not fair, Elena. We've always been interested in your life. Really? Name my company. Tell me what my AI application does. Explain why Marcus was interested in funding it. I waited through another long silence. I'll make it easier. Tell me what I do for work right now, today, without looking it up online. You work with computers, my mother said weakly. I am the founder and CEO of Neuroflow Technologies. I hold 17 patents in artificial intelligence and machine learning. I've been featured on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and Fast Company. Last month, I was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum about the future of human-AI collaboration. But you're right, I do work with computers. Elena, my father's voice was carefully controlled. I think we need to have a family meeting. There are clearly some things we need to discuss. What things would those be, Daddy? Well, this engagement, for one thing. This is very sudden, and we need to make sure you're making the right decision. Someone in Marcus's position. There could be complicated motivations. We just want to make sure you're protected. I laughed, a sound that surprised me with its genuine amusement. Protected from what? From marrying a man who thinks I'm brilliant? From joining my life with someone who respects my work and supports my ambitions? From being with someone who sees me as an equal partner rather than a liability to be managed? That's not what we meant. Actually, it's exactly what you meant. You can't imagine that someone like Marcus would be genuinely interested in someone like me. So there must be some ulterior motive. It couldn't possibly be that I've become exactly the kind of woman that extraordinary men find extraordinary. Elena, please don't put words in our mouths. We're just concerned. You're concerned that your narrative about me is falling apart, I interrupted. You're concerned that maybe you were wrong about my potential, my worth, my ability to build something meaningful with my life. You're concerned that the daughter you wrote off as too difficult and too ambitious might have been exactly as capable as she always believed she was. The conversation ended shortly after that with promises to discuss everything in person soon and awkward congratulations that sounded more like condolences. I hung up, feeling a satisfaction so deep and pure it was almost intoxicating. The wedding planning became my masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as celebration. Every decision I made was carefully calculated to showcase not just my success, but the complete transformation of my life from their unwanted daughter into someone who existed in an entirely different stratosphere of wealth, influence, and social significance. The venue was the Chateau de Versailles, because when you're marrying one of the world's most powerful men, you don't settle for any location that doesn't require international travel and diplomatic connections to secure. The guest list read like a combination of the Forbes Billionaire rankings and the society pages of every major city in the world. Tech industry titans, venture capital legends, European aristocracy, Hollywood A-listers who'd invested in technology companies, and political figures whose names appeared regularly in international news. My family, who'd spent their entire lives trying to social climb their way into circles that represented serious wealth and influence, suddenly found themselves invited as mere guests to an event where they were among the least significant people in attendance. "Elena, darling," my mother said during one of our wedding planning calls, her voice carefully controlled in that way that meant she was struggling to process what was happening. "Don't you think 600 guests might be a bit much? I mean, it's just so large, so public. Wouldn't something more intimate be more appropriate, more tasteful?" "Marcus has a lot of business associates he needs to include," I explained, reviewing the seating chart that had required a professional protocol expert to arrange properly. "And of course, there are family friends, political contacts, and charitable organization leaders we work with. 600 is actually quite modest for a wedding at our level." "Your level?" "Marcus and my level, mother. This is the kind of wedding that people in our position are expected to host. It's not just a personal celebration, it's a business and social event. People will be watching to see how we handle it." I could practically hear her struggling to understand this new reality, where her formerly disappointing daughter was casually discussing social expectations that applied to billionaires. "And the dress?" she asked. "I was thinking we could go shopping together, maybe look at some of the nicer boutiques in Greenwich." "Vera Wang is designing something custom," I said. "We're flying to New York next week for the final fitting. Marcus insisted on having her personally handle the entire process." "Vera Wang, Elena, that must cost." "It's not about the cost, mother. It's about working with the best. Marcus doesn't believe in compromising on quality, especially for something this important." Every detail was carefully chosen to demonstrate the vast distance between my current life and the world I'd grown up in. The flowers were flown in from 3 different countries. The catering was handled by the team that normally worked exclusively for heads of state and European royalty. The music was provided by the New York Philharmonic, with a special performance by a Grammy-winning artist who happened to be Marcus's personal friend. My family's reactions to each revelation were everything I'd hoped for and more. "A Philharmonic orchestra?" Sophia asked during one of our planning conversations. "For a wedding? Isn't that a bit excessive?" "It's what Marcus wanted," I explained, which was true. "He thought it would be nice to have music that matched the significance of the occasion." "And you're comfortable with all this? The expense, the publicity, the pressure?" I smiled, understanding that what she was really asking was whether I felt overwhelmed by a lifestyle so far beyond anything our family had ever experienced. "I'm very comfortable with it, Sophia. This is my life now. These are the kinds of decisions Marcus and I make together every day. It just seems so different from how you used to be." "I'm exactly who I always was," I replied. "I'm just finally in a position where that person is valued appropriately." The rehearsal dinner was held at Marcus's private club in the city, the kind of establishment that didn't advertise its existence, and where membership was limited to people who either held political office, ran major corporations, or had trust funds larger than most countries' GDP. My family arrived looking like they were attending a costume party, where the theme was wealthy people, clearly uncomfortable in formal wear that, while expensive by their standards, was obviously not custom-tailored. I watched my mother survey the room, taking in the casual conversations between tech industry legends, the Supreme Court justice who'd known Marcus's mentor, the foreign ambassadors who were attending as personal friends rather than diplomatic obligations. Her expression was a fascinating combination of awe, envy, and something that looked almost like grief. This is quite a crowd, my father murmured to me during cocktails, gesturing toward a group that included two Nobel Prize winners and the founder of a space exploration company. I had no idea you moved in these circles. I didn't 3 years ago, I admitted. But when you build something significant, you attract the attention of other people who've built significant things. Success tends to create its own social circle. And you're comfortable with all this level of prominence? I studied his face, recognizing that he was genuinely trying to understand how his formerly disappointing daughter had become someone who belonged in rooms like this. I'm very comfortable with it, Daddy. For the first time in my life, I'm around people who value the same things I do: innovation, intelligence, the desire to build something meaningful. It feels like home. During the dinner, Marcus stood to give a toast that I knew would become one of my most treasured memories. 3 years ago, he began, his voice carrying easily across the room filled with some of the most powerful people in the world. I thought I understood what it meant to be successful. I had built companies, made investments, achieved everything I thought I wanted. Then I met Elena, and I realized I'd been thinking too small. He turned to look at me, his expression soft with genuine affection. Elena doesn't just see opportunities where other people see problems. She sees possibilities that other people can't even imagine. She doesn't just build technology that makes life easier. She creates tools that help people become more than they thought they could be. She's not just brilliant, though she is that. She's not just beautiful, though she's certainly that too. She's transformative. She makes everything she touches better, including me. The applause was warm and genuine, but all I could focus on was the expression on my mother's face as she watched her former disappointment daughter being celebrated by a room full of people whose success she'd spent her life admiring from afar. Elena, Marcus continued, you once told me that your family thought no man like me would ever be interested in a woman like you. I want everyone in this room to know that they had it exactly backward. I'm the lucky one. Tomorrow, I get to marry the most extraordinary woman I've ever met, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of her. The rest of the evening was a blur of congratulations, champagne, and conversations where my family stood on the sidelines watching me navigate social situations they'd never seen me handle with such confidence and ease. I caught Sophia watching me intently during dessert, her expression thoughtful in a way that suggested she was seeing me clearly for the first time. Elena, she said when she finally approached me near the end of the evening, can I ask you something? Of course. Were you always this confident, this sure of yourself? Because I'm realizing I might not have been paying attention before. I considered her question carefully, recognizing that this might be the first genuine conversation we'd ever had as adults. I was always sure of my abilities, Sophia. I was just never in an environment where those abilities were valued. It's easier to be confident when you're surrounded by people who recognize your worth. And Marcus really sees you the way he described tonight? Like you're this extraordinary person? He sees me the way I actually am, I said simply, just like I see him the way he actually tis. That's what makes it work. She nodded slowly, and I thought I saw something like understanding in her expression. I think maybe we never really saw you at all. No, I agreed, you never did. The wedding day itself was perfect in every detail. The ceremony was held in the chateau's Hall of Mirrors, with natural light streaming, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows and casting rainbow prisms across the marble floors. I walked down the aisle in my custom Vera Wang gown, a masterpiece of French lace and hand-sewn pearls that had taken 6 months to create, while the New York Philharmonic played a piece Marcus had commissioned specifically for our wedding. As I made my way toward the altar where Marcus waited, looking devastatingly handsome in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, I caught glimpses of the assembled guests. The president of France sat in the third row, next to the CEO of the largest technology company in Europe. Behind them, I spotted 3 Academy Award winners, 2 Nobel laureates, and the heir to one of the oldest royal families in the world. The tech industry was represented by every major founder and investor who mattered, while the society pages would spend months analyzing the guest list that read like a comprehensive directory of global influence and wealth. But the faces I found most interesting were those of my family, sitting in the reserved section for immediate relatives, looking simultaneously proud and completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening around them. My mother wore a pale blue Oscar de la Renta dress that I'd paid for, not out of generosity, but because I couldn't risk having her appear at my wedding in something that would embarrass us both. My father looked distinguished in his morning coat, though I could see the tension in his shoulders as he tried to project comfort in a situation that was clearly beyond anything he'd ever experienced. Sophia, serving as my maid of honor despite our complicated relationship, looked genuinely beautiful in the custom Marchesa gown I'd selected for her. More importantly, she looked like she was finally beginning to understand that the sister she'd always seen as the family disappointment had somehow transformed into someone who belonged in settings like this. When Marcus and I exchanged vows, words we'd written ourselves that spoke about partnership, mutual respect, and building a future that would change the world, I saw my mother dab at her eyes with her handkerchief. Whether the tears were from emotion, shock, or some combination of both, I couldn't tell, but I found their presence deeply satisfying. Elena Victoria Morrison, the officiant pronounced, do you take Marcus to be your husband, to support his dreams as he supports yours, to build something extraordinary together, and to face whatever challenges come with the confidence that you are stronger together than apart? I do, I said, my voice clear and certain, and I meant every word. Not just because I loved Marcus, though I did, completely and genuinely, but because this moment represented the absolute triumph of everything I'd always known I could become over everything they'd told me I was. Marcus Chen, do you take Elena to be your wife, to celebrate her brilliance, to support her ambitions, to stand beside her as an equal partner in building the life you both deserve? I do, he replied, his eyes never leaving mine, and I saw in his expression the same wonder and gratitude I felt every day when I remembered that this extraordinary man had chosen me, not despite who I was, but because of exactly who I was. When he kissed me as the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause was thunderous, but all I could hear was the sound of every cruel prediction my family had ever made about my future crumbling into irrelevance. The reception was held in the chateau's gardens, with tables arranged around a central dance floor where Marcus and I would have our first dance as husband and wife. Each table seated 12 guests, and the careful arrangement meant that technology moguls found themselves in conversation with European nobility, while venture capitalists discussed philanthropy with Academy Award-winning directors who'd invested their Hollywood fortunes in emerging technologies. My family's table was positioned strategically where they could observe everything, but weren't quite close enough to the head table to draw attention to themselves. I watched them throughout the evening, noting how they struggled to make conversation with the other guests at their table, a mixture of Marcus's Stanford Business School classmates who now ran major companies, and several of my MIT professors who'd become leaders in artificial intelligence research. During the cocktail hour, I overheard my mother attempting to explain her connection to me to Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, who'd won the Turing Award for her pioneering work in machine learning and who'd been one of my strongest advocates when I'd first entered the tech industry. Elena has always been so focused, my mother was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was trying to sound supportive while subtly establishing her own importance. Even as a child, she was just obsessed with those computer things. We always knew she'd end up doing something technical. Dr. Chen, who knew exactly how little support I'd received from my family during my early career, smiled politely. Elena is extraordinary. Her work on predictive analytics has influenced entire industries. You must be very proud of what she's accomplished. Oh, we are, my mother replied quickly. Though of course we always hoped she'd find balance, you know. Career success is wonderful, but family is so important too. We're just delighted that she's found someone like Marcus who appreciates her unique qualities. I caught Dr. Chen's eye across the room and saw her barely suppress an eye roll. She'd heard enough about my family background to understand exactly what unique qualities meant in my mother's vocabulary, and her expression made it clear that she found my mother's revisionist history as ridiculous as I did. The dinner itself was a 7-course meal prepared by a team of Michelin-starred chefs, paired with wines from Marcus's private collection that included bottles worth more than most people's annual salaries. Between courses, several of our friends gave toasts that painted a picture of our relationship that I knew my family was hearing for the first time. I remember the first time Marcus mentioned Elena, said David Kim, Marcus's business partner and closest friend. He came back from that initial meeting completely energized in a way I'd never seen before. He said he'd met someone who didn't just understand technology. She understood how technology could reshape human potential. And then, he spent the next 3 hours explaining her business plan with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for discussing your own children. The toast continued with David describing how Marcus had called him at midnight after our third business dinner to say that he'd never met anyone who challenged his thinking the way I did, who made him want to be smarter, more creative, more ambitious. Marcus built his first company to prove he could do it, David concluded. But he built his second company, and his third, and everything since then. Because Elena showed him that success isn't about what you can accumulate, it's about what you can create. She didn't just change his business philosophy, she changed his understanding of what it means to build a meaningful life. Dr. Chen gave the next toast, focusing on my professional achievements and their impact on the field of artificial intelligence. 5 years ago, Elena Morrison was a name known only to a few professors and her colleagues at Goldman Sachs. Today, her work on predictive analytics has influenced how every major technology company approaches machine learning. But more than that, she's demonstrated that the most important innovations come not from people who follow established paths, but from people who have the courage to create entirely new ones. She paused, looking directly at my family's table. Elena once told me that her family worried she was too ambitious, too focused on her career, too serious about changing the world. I want everyone here to know that those exact qualities, her ambition, her focus, her determination to make a difference, are precisely why she's become one of the most influential people in technology today. Sometimes the things that make us different are exactly the things that make us extraordinary. The applause for Dr. Chen's toast was particularly enthusiastic, and I noticed several guests glancing toward my family's table with expressions that suggested they understood the subtext of her remarks. But it was Marcus's toast that delivered the final perfect blow to every assumption my family had ever made about my worth and my future. Most of you know that Elena and I met when she pitched her first company to my investment firm, he began, his voice carrying easily across the garden. What you might not know is that she walked into that meeting with the most comprehensive business plan I'd ever seen. Projections that were so sophisticated they seemed almost prophetic, and a confidence that was absolutely magnetic. She wasn't asking me to take a chance on her, she was offering me the opportunity to be part of something revolutionary. He turned to look at me, his expression soft with genuine affection and respect. Over the past 3 years, I've watched Elena build a company that has fundamentally changed how businesses operate. I've seen her speak at conferences where she's the youngest person in the room and the smartest person on the stage. I've watched her solve problems that stumped teams of experienced engineers, and I've seen her lead with a combination of intelligence and integrity that makes everyone around her want to be better. The garden was completely quiet, hundreds of guests hanging on every word. But the thing I love most about Elena isn't her professional success, remarkable as that is. It's the way she sees possibility where other people see obstacles. It's the way she makes decisions based on what could be rather than what has always been. It's the way she refused to accept other people's limitations on what her life could become. He paused, and I knew he was thinking about all the conversations we'd had about my family, about the years I'd spent believing their version of my worth, about the transformation that had brought me to this moment. Elena's family used to tell her that men like me would never be interested in women like her. Too ambitious, too serious, too focused on building something meaningful rather than just being decorative. I want everyone here to understand how fundamentally wrong that assessment was. Elena isn't too ambitious. She's exactly ambitious enough to change the world. She isn't too serious. She's serious about the things that matter. And she isn't too focused on building something meaningful. She's built something extraordinary, and I'm honored to be part of her life. The applause was thunderous and sustained, but I was focused entirely on my family's faces. My mother looked like she was struggling not to cry, though whether from pride, embarrassment, or some combination of both, I couldn't tell. My father was staring at Marcus with an expression of something approaching awe, as if he was finally understanding the magnitude of what his formerly disappointing daughter had achieved. Sophia was looking directly at me with what I recognized as genuine admiration, perhaps for the first time in our lives. "So here's to Elena," Marcus concluded, raising his glass toward me. The woman who proved that the best way to respond to people who don't believe in your dreams is to make those dreams so big and so successful that their opinions become irrelevant. I love you, I admire you, and I can't wait to see what we build together. The rest of the evening was a blur of dancing, champagne, and conversations where I moved effortlessly between groups of guests who represented every level of global influence and success. I danced with Nobel Prize winners and Supreme Court justices, discussed future technology trends with the founders of companies whose products were used by billions of people, and accepted congratulations from people whose names appeared regularly in international headlines. My family, meanwhile, spent the evening as observers rather than participants, clearly overwhelmed by the social dynamics of an event where they were among the least significant people present. I watched them attempt to make conversation with other guests, their discomfort obvious as they struggled to find common ground with people whose lives operated on a completely different scale than anything they'd ever experienced. Around midnight, as the evening was winding down and most of the guests had offered their final congratulations, my mother finally approached me near the edge of the dance floor where I was saying goodbye to some of Marcus's international business partners. "Elena," she said quietly, waiting until the other guests had moved away before continuing. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" I nodded, curious about what she might have to say after witnessing the complete transformation of her understanding of my life and capabilities. We walked to a quieter section of the garden, away from the remaining guests and the soft jazz music that was providing background ambiance as the evening concluded. "I need to say something to you," she began, her voice unsteady in a way I'd never heard before. "Tonight has been overwhelming. Seeing you in this setting, meeting your friends, listening to those toasts, watching you and Marcus together, I'm realizing that I may have been very wrong about some things." "What kinds of things?" I asked, genuinely curious about how she was processing the evening's revelations. "About you, about your capabilities, your potential, your worth as a person." She paused, looking out over the chateau grounds where the last few guests were still mingling in small groups. "I think I may have been so focused on trying to protect you from disappointment that I never really saw what you were capable of achieving." "Protect me from disappointment?" I believed that if you set your expectations too high, if you aimed for things that seemed impossible for someone from our background, you'd end up hurt and bitter when you couldn't achieve them. I thought I was being realistic about what kinds of opportunities would actually be available to you. I studied her face, recognizing that this was probably the closest thing to an apology I was ever going to receive from her. And now? Now I'm realizing that maybe I was projecting my own limitations onto you. Maybe I was so afraid of my own dreams seeming foolish that I convinced myself yours were foolish too. She met my eyes directly for the first time in the conversation. "You've built something extraordinary, Elena. You've married an extraordinary man who clearly sees you as an equal partner. You've created a life that's beyond anything I ever imagined possible, and you did it all while I was telling you that your ambitions were unrealistic." "Yes," I said simply, "I did. Can you forgive me? For not believing in you, for not supporting you, for spending so many years telling you that you were aiming too high instead of encouraging you to aim even higher?" I considered her question carefully, thinking about all the years of criticism, dismissal, and casual cruelty that had shaped my understanding of my own worth. I thought about the original Elena, who had died believing that her family's assessment of her value was accurate. I thought about the satisfaction I'd felt throughout this evening, watching them confront the reality of what I'd become despite their predictions. "I don't think forgiveness is really the issue here, Mother," I said finally. "I think the issue is understanding. Do you understand why I stopped trying to earn your approval? Do you understand why I stopped sharing my plans and dreams with you? Do you understand that your opinion of my capabilities became irrelevant to me because it was so consistently wrong?" She nodded slowly. "I think I'm beginning to—" "Good. Because I need you to understand that this life, this success, this marriage, none of it happened because I finally figured out how to be the daughter you wanted. It happened because I finally stopped trying to be the daughter you wanted and started being the person I actually was." "And who is that person?" I smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with finally being seen clearly by people who had spent years refusing to look. someone who was always exactly as ambitious, exactly as serious, and exactly as capable as I believed I was. Someone who was never too much of anything, just more than you were ready to understand. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last few guests saying their goodbyes near the chateau entrance. "What happens now?" she asked. "Between us, I mean. Between our family and your new life." "That depends entirely on whether you can accept me as I actually am, rather than constantly trying to reshape me into something more comfortable for you to understand. Marcus and I are building something significant together. Not just our marriage, but our work, our philanthropic efforts, our impact on the world. You can be part of that if you can appreciate it for what it is. But I'm not going to spend any more energy trying to convince you that my choices are valid. I want to try," she said, "to understand, to be supportive, to have a relationship with the extraordinary woman you've become, rather than the more conventional daughter I thought I wanted." "Then we'll see how that goes," I replied. "But understand that you'll be joining my life as it is now, not asking me to modify it to make you more comfortable." She nodded, and I saw something in her expression that might have been relief. "Your father and we'd like that very much." The conversation ended with a tentative hug, the first physical affection we'd shared in years that felt genuine rather than perfunctory. As she walked back toward the chateau to collect my father and Sophia for their departure, I remained in the garden for a few minutes, processing the complexity of emotions that came with having your family finally acknowledge your worth after years of dismissing it. Marcus found me there a few minutes later, having finished saying goodbye to the last of our international guests who needed to catch early morning flights back to various continents. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Chen?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Satisfied," I said, leaning back against him and watching the chateau staff begin the process of cleaning up after what had undoubtedly been one of the most significant social events they'd ever hosted. Completely, thoroughly satisfied. Good satisfied or revenge satisfied? "Is there a difference?" I asked, echoing our conversation from months earlier. "With you, I'm never entirely sure," he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Should I be concerned about what you're planning next?" "Nothing diabolical," I promised. "I think I've proven my point sufficiently." "And what point was that?" "That the best revenge against people who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong. It's becoming so successful that their opinions become irrelevant." 3 months after the wedding, Neuroflow Technologies went public in what Forbes called the most successful tech IPO in history. The company's valuation hit $3.2 billion on the first day of trading, making me one of the youngest self-made female billionaires in the world. The New York Times business section ran a full-page feature about my meteoric rise from obscurity to tech industry leadership, complete with analysis of how my artificial intelligence innovations were reshaping multiple industries. My personal net worth, when combined with Marcus's holdings and our joint investments, put us among the 50 wealthiest couples in the world. More importantly, our company was genuinely changing how businesses operated, making employees more productive and creative by automating the routine tasks that had previously consumed so much of their time and mental energy. The media attention was intense but generally positive. I appeared on the covers of Fortune, Forbes, and Fast Company within the same month. Harvard Business School invited me to give a lecture on entrepreneurship and innovation. The World Economic Forum asked me to lead a panel on the future of artificial intelligence. I was profiled in Vogue as one of the new power women reshaping global business, complete with a fashion spread shot at our Napa Valley estate. My family's reaction to this avalanche of public recognition was everything I'd hoped for and more. "Elena Chen, named to Time's 100 most influential people," my mother read aloud during one of our monthly phone calls, a new tradition we'd established after the wedding. I still can't quite believe this is real. "Which part?" I asked, reviewing quarterly reports in my home office while we talked. "Any of it, all of it. The fact that you're on magazine covers, that you're invited to speak at international conferences, that world leaders want to meet with you to discuss technology policy." She paused. "The fact that I spent so many years telling you that your ambitions were unrealistic when they were actually modest." "Modest? Elena, you've exceeded every prediction anyone made about what was possible for someone from our background. You haven't just succeeded, you've redefined what success looks like. I smiled, remembering all the conversations where she'd warned me about setting my expectations too high. I suppose I have. Your father wants to know if you'd be willing to speak at his club's annual dinner. He's been getting requests ever since the Times article mentioned that you grew up in Greenwich. What kind of speaking are we talking about? About entrepreneurship? About building a successful company? About what young women can accomplish if they set their minds to it? He thinks it would be inspiring for the members' daughters. I considered this request carefully, recognizing the irony of being asked to inspire young women by the same family that had spent years trying to convince me that my own inspirations were unrealistic. I'll do it, I said finally. But I'm going to tell them the truth about what it takes to build something significant. I'm going to talk about the importance of ignoring people who tell you your dreams are too big, even when those people are family members who think they're protecting you. That's fine, my mother said, and I could hear her processing the implications of what I'd just said. I think that's exactly what they need to hear. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the main dining room of my father's exclusive club, looking out at an audience of wealthy Connecticut families who represented exactly the kind of conventional success my parents had always admired. The room was full of hedge fund managers, corporate executives, and old money heirs who'd spent their lives playing it safe within established systems. Most of you know me as Richard Morrison's daughter, I began. The one who was supposed to follow a traditional path. Good marriage, charitable work, supporting my husband's career rather than building my own. 5 years ago, many people in this room would have agreed that was the most realistic plan for my future. I paused, noting the uncomfortable shifts in body language from audience members who remembered exactly what kinds of conversations had taken place about my prospects and potential. Instead, I decided to build a company that has fundamentally changed how businesses operate around the world. I decided to marry a man who sees me as an equal partner rather than a decorative asset. I decided to aim for goals that seemed impossible rather than settling for goals that seemed safe. I went on to talk about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who believe in your potential rather than people who want to limit it, about the difference between realistic planning and limited thinking, about the courage required to pursue opportunities that exist outside your family's understanding of what's possible. The biggest risk you can take, I concluded, isn't aiming too high and failing. It's aiming too low and succeeding at something that never challenged you to become who you're actually capable of being. The young women in your families deserve to know that their dreams aren't too big. They're just bigger than the dreams their grandmothers were allowed to have. The applause was enthusiastic, and during the reception afterward, I was approached by dozens of parents who wanted to introduce me to their daughters, to thank me for providing an example of what was possible, to ask advice about encouraging ambitious young women who seemed to be following unconventional paths. My father, who had introduced me with obvious pride and genuine admiration, found me near the end of the evening as I was saying goodbye to the last few families. "Elena," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology, a real one, not just the polite acknowledgement I gave you at the wedding." "For what specifically?" "For spending so many years trying to convince you that success meant fitting in rather than standing out. For treating your intelligence like it was a social liability rather than your greatest asset. For not seeing that your refusal to settle for conventional goals wasn't stubbornness, it was wisdom." I studied his face, seeing genuine regret and something that looked like newfound respect. "And what do you see now?" "I see a daughter who was always exactly as extraordinary as she believed she was, and a father who was too limited in his thinking to recognize what he had." He paused, looking around the room where several families were still discussing my presentation with obvious excitement. "I see someone who has proven that the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate your own potential." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Not because I needed his validation. I'd moved far beyond requiring my family's approval for my sense of self-worth, but because it felt good to finally be seen clearly by people who had spent so many years looking at me without really seeing anything at all. Now, 3 years later, I'm sitting in my home office in our Napa Valley estate, preparing for a board meeting where we'll be discussing Neuroflow's expansion into international markets. Marcus is in his office on the other side of the house, working on the renewable energy project that represents his latest attempt to use technology to solve global problems. We'll meet in the kitchen for lunch, like we do every day, sharing updates about our respective work and planning the charity gala we're hosting next month to raise money for education initiatives in developing countries. Yesterday, I received an invitation to Sophia's second wedding. Her marriage to Bradley had lasted exactly 18 months before imploding under the weight of his gambling addiction and her growing understanding that a trust fund wasn't the same thing as actual accomplishment. Her new fiancé is a doctor she met while volunteering at a children's hospital, someone who shares her interest in making a meaningful contribution to the world rather than just maintaining social status. The invitation was addressed correctly this time, sent to our Napa estate rather than my old apartment, and included a handwritten note asking if I would consider giving a toast at the reception about building a life that matters rather than a life that looks good. I've decided to accept, partly because I'm genuinely happy for Sophia's growth as a person, but mostly because I find the symbolism irresistible. 3 years ago, I was the sister who was too difficult to love, too ambitious to attract a good husband, too serious to make anyone happy. Now I'm the sister whose marriage is held up as an example of what real partnership looks like, whose career success has redefined our family's understanding of what's possible, whose life choices are studied rather than criticized. My phone buzzes with a text from Marcus. Lunch in 10 minutes? I have news about the climate change project that I think will make you very excited. I smile, saving my work and closing my laptop. This life, this beautiful, successful, love-filled life where I wake up every morning next to a man who thinks I'm the most fascinating person he's ever met, where I spend my days building companies that genuinely improve the world, where I fall asleep every night in a home filled with respect and intellectual excitement and genuine partnership, is everything my mother said I'd never have because I was too difficult to love. She was wrong about many things, but she was especially wrong about that. I'm not difficult to love. I'm impossible to forget. And every day, in every way that matters, I prove that the best revenge against people who underestimate your worth isn't proving them wrong once. It's building a life so extraordinary that their former opinions become historical curiosities rather than current concerns. As I walk toward the kitchen where my husband is waiting with whatever exciting breakthrough he wants to share, I think about that broken version of myself who died at 28, convinced that her family's assessment of her value was accurate. She never could have imagined this life, this love, this complete and total victory over every limiting belief that had ever been imposed on her potential. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living so well that your former critics become your most enthusiastic supporters, not because you've changed who you are, but because you've finally become who you always were underneath their expectations and limitations. I reach the kitchen and see Marcus's face light up when he sees me, the same way it has every day for 5 years. He pulls me into his arms and spins me around, laughing about some revolutionary development his team has achieved in sustainable energy technology. And I remember how my mother once told me that no man would ever want to marry someone as serious and ambitious as me. She was wrong about everything else, but she was catastrophically wrong about that. I'm not too serious. I'm serious about the right things. I'm not too ambitious. I'm ambitious enough to change the world. And I'm not too difficult to love. I'm exactly difficult enough to attract a man who finds intellectual challenge irresistible and emotional complexity fascinating. Ready to save the planet? Marcus asks, his eyes sparkling with the same excitement that made me fall in love with him. Always, I say, and I mean it completely. After all, I've still got a lot more extraordinary living to do.